change without noticing the exact moment it happens. 1 second, I'm just existing. The next, there's a softer version of me that only appears when your shadow passes through thought. I don't call it, it arrives anyway. In that version, everything slows down differently. My reactions lose their urgency, my words lose their sharp edges. Even my silence becomes less defensive when you exist in it. I can't recreate it on purpose. It refuses intention. Not memory, not imagination, something in between that only activates when I stop trying to control it. There is a version of me that only exists when I think of you, and I don't fully recognize myself there, but I don't reject it either. It feels like a place I didn't build, yet somehow belong to. I tried to separate it from who I am now. It didn't detach. Instead it kept returning in softer ways, in pauses, in hesitations, in moments where I almost become someone I used to be with you. That version of me returns without asking permission. Not as longing, not as regret, just continuity that I didn't realize I was still carrying. Maybe people are not single versions of themselves. Maybe they are rooms of possibilities, and some doors only open when certain names are remembered. So I don't fight it anymore. If I become someone different when I think of you, then maybe that difference was always part of me, just waiting for you to make it visible. At some point I gave up trying to describe it, not because it disappeared, but because every description felt like it was arriving late to something already happening inside me. So I left it unnamed. It didn't leave. It moves differently now, not like emotion, more like atmosphere that follows thought without asking permission. Sometimes I notice it in stillness, sometimes in the middle of noise, sometimes in nothing at all. It doesn't need conditions. Some feelings don't require attention to survive. I stopped explaining the feeling, and it enormous presence that refuses to become smaller when ignored. And that's what makes it impossible to place. Tried to categorize it once, but it didn't fit any version of language I had. It kept slipping out of definition, like it understood the limits better than I did. So I stopped trying, I stopped explaining it, and it didn't change shape to prove me wrong. It just continued in a quieter way. Maybe understanding was never the goal. Maybe naming things was only ever a way to feel in control of what already exists. So I let it remain undefined, not resolved, not resolved, just continuing without needing permission from language. I didn't expect you to survive like this, not as a memory that repeats itself, but as something that slips in when nothing is being asked of me. It's always the quiet moments, never the loud ones. There are gaps in my attention now that feel strangely specific, like my mind learned a pattern it never agreed to memorize. It still follows without hesitation, and inside those gaps you appear, not fully, not clearly, just enough. I notice it more when I'm not thinking hard, when everything is soft, unguarded, and slightly unstructured. That's when you enter again, not as thought, but as interruption inside stillness. It doesn't feel like remembering, it feels like recognition without permission. You still interrupt my quiet thoughts, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to change the direction of whatever was about to fade into silence. And I never stop it in time. I used to think this would weaken, that repetition would dull it, turn it into background noise, but it hasn't. It changes shape instead. You interrupt my quiet thoughts, and I let it happen now. Not because I'm holding on, but because stopping it feels less honest than allowing it. Maybe some presence breaks in your direction, and I no longer pretend that I don't notice. Into a day that looked unchanged and almost believed it. Same light, same ordinary sounds, same rhythm of people pretending nothing ever shifts too deeply. But something in me didn't sync with it. Not loudly, just slightly off, like a memory refusing calibration. There's a version of me that still expects continuity from the past. It looks for you in places that no longer agree with that expectation. And every time it fails, the present feels less stable, not broken, just rewritten without announcement. Time doesn't erase it, it's without asking. The way time pretends you never changed anything is the hardest illusion to ignore, because everything looks correct except the part of me that remembers differently. And that difference doesn't fade easily. I stopped correcting the feeling, it didn't respond to logic anyway. It just stays there, quietly insisting that something important was never fully concluded. Time continues forward, but something in me keeps looking sideways. Not lost, just misaligned with what is now. Maybe change isn't visible in events. Maybe it's visible in the distance between what I remember and what I'm allowed to confirm. So I move through days that look intact, carrying something that no longer matches their shape. And I don't know which one is wrong, the world or the part of me that still remembers you inside it. Structure at first, a timeline, a sequence, a clean before and after version of you. It collapsed immediately, not loudly, just quietly refusing to behave like it was supposed to. So I stopped arranging things properly, and what remained wasn't memory in order, but clusters of moments that don't agree on when they happened. You exist more in patterns than in chronology. Some parts of you arrive too early, some too late, some without permission from logic at all. And I've stopped correcting them. Correction makes it worse. I tried to forget you in order, but my mind doesn't think linearly. It loops, it folds back, it revisits without warning. And in those returns, you are never in the same position twice. There is no clean version of this, only overlapping impressions that refuse to settle into a single narrative. Even my attempts to move on end up referencing you in ways I don't notice at first. I try to forget you in order, but forgetting doesn't obey sequence either. It rearranges itself every time I try. Maybe memory was never built like a story. Maybe it's closer to weather, shifting without obligation to remain consistent with itself. So I let it stay disorder, because every time I try to fix it, you become more precise in the places I didn't expect. And somehow that feels closer to truth than anything arranged correctly. You didn't announce yourself in my life. No dramatic entrance, no warning, just a shift, like the room forgot how it used to feel before you were part of it. I noticed it slowly, in the way my thoughts became less certain when they reached your name. You were never loud in my memory. That's what makes it hard to remove. You exist there like warmth left behind on fabric not seen, but always remembered by touch. Even ordinary days carry a trace of your rhythm and how I respond to them. Some things don't stay by force, they stay by familiarity. You stayed in the quiet way that doesn't ask to be noticed, not as a story I repeat, but as a feeling that never fully leaves the background of me. And even when I move forward, something in me still moves, as if you are nearby. forgetting it didn't take because you weren't something added. You became part of how things feel when nothing is being said. You stayed in the quiet way, not holding on, not letting go, just existing in the softer edges of my thoughts. Maybe presence doesn't need continuity. Maybe it only needs impact that never asks to be undone. So I stopped trying to define where you are in me, because wherever that is, it doesn't feel like memory anymore. It feels like something still living in a gentler form. I stopped expecting doors to open the way they used to, not because I learned acceptance, but because expectation itself started sounding unfamiliar. Still, there are moments my attention turns before I decide where to place it, and it always pauses in the same direction. Nothing announces your absence clearly. It shows up in timing, like I finished thoughts a fraction too early, as if something used to complete them without effort. Now I notice the gap only after it happens. Some returns don't happen in reality, they happen in reaction. You didn't return, but something in me still did. Not as hope, not as memory, just an automatic turning towards something that is no longer arriving, and I don't interrupt it anymore. I tried replacing the space you occupied with new attention. It worked briefly, then everything new started echoing you in unrelated ways. Not because they are similar, but because I am. You didn't return, yet parts of me still behave like you might, quietly, unintentionally, consistently. Maybe some presences don't leave, they just stop negotiating with reality and continue inside behavior instead. So I let it happen, this quiet continuation inside me that no longer expects correction. You are not here, something shaped like you still moves first. It starts as something ordinary, a pausing conversation, a half-formed thought about nothing important. And then your name rises, not spoken, just forming itself. At the edge of my breath, I stop it before it becomes sound. There is no decision in that moment, only habit, like my mind still believes it has permission to reach you, even when everything else knows better. The name disappears again, but not completely. Some words don't leave, they just wait for weaker moments. I almost say your name out loud, and that almost becomes its own kind of language. Not spoken, not silent, just suspended in the space where intention hesitates. And somehow that space feels full of you. It will ever stop happening, but the question feels unnecessary, because it already answers itself by continuing. I almost say your name and nothing outside notices, but inside something shifts every time it stops halfway. Maybe forgetting isn't erasing, maybe it's learning how to interrupt yourself before meaning completes its shape. So I keep stopping at the edge of it, not because I want to, but because that's where you still exist, without needing to be called. You didn't leave in a way I could point to. No sound, no moment I could mark as final. It was slower than that, more like a light changing its angle without asking the room for permission. And somehow I noticed only afterward that everything looked different. I still catch traces of you in how I hesitate before speaking, in how certain thoughts pause before becoming words. It doesn't feel like absence, it feels more like adjustment. Something in me learning how to exist without your shape beside it. Some presences don't vanish, they soften into everything else. You stayed in my memory in a very quiet way, not as a story I repeat, but as a tone that never fully disappears from what I feel. And even silence now has a familiar quality to it. I tried to separate you from the present, it didn't work, because you aren't located in time anymore. You're distributed through small reactions I no longer control. You stayed in my memory, not loudly, not clearly, just consistently, like something the mind decided not to correct. Maybe remembering isn't holding on, maybe it's just the mind refusing to fully edit what mattered. So I let it stay like this, unforced, unresolved, but strangely gentle. You in the background of everything, without needing to appear. I talk differently now, not because I changed, but because something in me learned to pause where you used to exist. Even simple things arrive with hesitation. A word starts forming, then remembers it used to belong to a version of us that no longer responds. There are gaps in my speech that weren't there before. Not mistakes, not forgetfulness, more like footprints left in the middle of language where meaning used to stand and decided not to stay. I notice them more when I'm alone. It's strange how absence can organize itself inside something as ordinary as thought. You became the space you left between my sentences. Not gone, not present, just shaping everything without being spoken. And I keep speaking around you without realizing I never stopped, including you. Sometimes I almost finish a thought about you, but it bends halfway through into something softer, something that refuses definition. I let it be unfinished. It feels more honest that way. You became the quiet structure inside my language, not memory, more like gravity I no longer question. Maybe we don't lose people, maybe they just to the grammar of us, where they stop needing to appear in order to still be there. So I speak, and you are there in what I don't complete. Not as a story, not as an ending, just the space that makes everything else possible. I noticed it in the smallest interruption, not silence itself, but the way my thoughts start to slow down right before something important is said. It feels familiar, like a habit my body remembers without asking my permission. There are pauses in me now that don't belong to the present. They arrive before I understand why, and suddenly everything around them feels slightly rearranged. Even ordinary speech has a different weight when they appear. It's not imagination, it's residue, something that stayed behind without needing to stay visible. I can still hear you in the way I pause, not as sound, not as memory, but as timing that my thoughts keep returning to without explanation. And I don't interrupt it anymore. To speak faster, to think cleaner, to break the pattern, but it only moved deeper into places I can't consciously reach. So it became part of how I exist. You are not present, but the rhythm you left behind still edits my silence quietly, consistently, without permission. Maybe people don't leave behind images, maybe they leave behind timing, the invisible spacing between thoughts that used to belong to two people. So I let the pauses stay, because every time they appear, I understand something I don't need to say out loud anymore. It wasn't dramatic when it ended, No final sound, no clear break, just a gradual thinning of something I didn't know had weight, until it was gone. At first I thought I would notice the absence loudly, but it came quietly instead. Inside small adjustments I didn't immediately question, the way certain thoughts no longer had somewhere to go, the way silence changed its behavior. What you left behind me isn't a memory I can point to. It's more like structure without content, a shape that remains after everything inside it moved away, and I still walk around it without realizing. Not empty, just incomplete in a specific way. What you left behind me still influences how I move through everything else. Not as presence, not as absence, but as something in between that never finished dissolving. And I don't rush it anymore. I tried filling the space once, it didn't accept replacements. Not because it resisted, but because it already knew what used to be there. What you left behind me doesn't disappear. When I stop thinking about it, it changes where my thoughts go instead. Maybe endings don't remove things, maybe they redistribute them into the way we continue existing afterward. So I live with it now, not as loss I can define, but as something that quietly remains inside how I move forward. There's a strange gap in my memory where your beginning used to be. I can't find the first moment anymore, only what followed after it became impossible to treat you as temporary. You didn't arrive clearly, you accumulated. Some days I try to reconstruct the order of things, but it keeps breaking apart into emotional fragments instead of chronology. What remains is not a scene, it's a feeling that learned how to recognize itself in your absence. Not everything is remembered as it happened. Some things are remembered as they remained. I forgot how you started, but not how you stayed. And that difference changed the way I understand everything that comes after you. You became less like a moment, more like a condition. Even now, when nothing is happening, there is still something in me that responds as if you might appear without announcement. I don't correct it, it feels too natural to question. I forgot how you started, but not how you stayed. Quietly, consistently, like something my life adjusted itself around. Maybe beginnings are not important. Maybe what defines us is what refuses to stop echoing after the first reason is gone. So I let the memory remain incomplete at its edges, because clarity might erase what meaning learned to become. And I don't want that erased. I can't point to the moment it changed. You were once someone with edges, with decisions, with a voice that belonged to itself. Now it's different. Now you arrive without arriving, like a temperature shift in thought that doesn't announce where it came from. I still use your name sometimes, but it doesn't attach to anything solid anymore. It behaves more like a sensation than an identity, something I don't look at but still react to. It moves through me without asking what it's called. Some things stop being people without stopping their influence. I don't know when you stopped being a person and became a feeling, but I recognize you faster now than I ever did when you were real in front of me. And that recognition doesn't need explanation to be certain. There are moments I almost rebuild you correctly, but the moment I try, you dissolve into something softer, less defined, more honest than structure allows. So I stop correcting it. You no longer exist as someone I can describe. You exist as something I can only notice when it appears inside me. Maybe transformation isn't about distance or time. Maybe it's about losing the ability to separate someone from the way they changed you. So you remain not as memory, not as absence, but as a feeling that learned how to stay without form. And I don't resist it anymore. Something unusual the other day, a response in me, arriving before the question was finished. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just automatic recognition, like my thoughts had learned a second language I never studied. You don't appear in my memory like a photograph. It's more unstable than that. Sometimes you show up as timing, sometimes as hesitation, sometimes as the way I stop mid-action for no visible reason. I can't predict it, it just happens. Not all influence announce themselves. Some simply rewrite reflexes. You became the part of me that answers before I think. Not as control, not as intention, but as something my mind accepted without negotiation. And now I can't always tell where I am, and that response begins. I tried observing it closely, but observation changes it. The moment I watch it, it becomes something else, less visible, more certain. So I stopped interfering. You became the part of me that reacts without permission, and strangely it feels less like loss and more like integration. Maybe connection isn't what we choose to keep, maybe it's what survives without needing our agreement anymore. So I let it stay unedited, this quiet reflex shaped like you, living somewhere between thought and instinct. Not remembered, not forgotten, just present in the way I continue. without permission, not as a full memory, not as a clear image, just a shift in attention that doesn't ask if it's allowed to stay. I could be in the middle of anything, speaking, walking, pretending I'm fully elsewhere. And suddenly, there you are again, not arriving, not appearing, just already there. I don't always notice it immediately. Sometimes it's only visible in how I slow down for no reason I can't explain, or how my thoughts lose urgency without warning. It's subtle but consistent, no trigger I can name, no pattern I can control. I'm still thinking you, not as a choice, not as effort, but as something my mind does when it stops being careful. And I don't always stop it anymore. I tried replacing it with other thoughts. It worked briefly, but they all drifted back into the same shape eventually, like everything new had learned your direction. I'm still thinking you, even when I'm not trying to, and that feels less like remembering and more like continuation. Maybe some thoughts don't belong to the present. Maybe they belong to what changed us and never fully left. So I let it happen, because resisting it doesn't make it smaller, it just makes it louder in silence. It didn't start as a memory, it started as something else. A sentence I was building for no one in particular, until it suddenly tilted and became about you. I didn't notice the shift immediately. Somewhere between subject and verb, you arrived again. Not clearly, not fully formed, just enough presence to interrupt the direction of my thought. And then I had to slow down without deciding to. This happens more often than I admit, language bending slightly whenever it gets close to what you meant to me. Even unrelated words seem to hesitate near your outline, as if they recognize something they were never taught to remember. I don't chase it, it just happens, like meaning briefly forgetting where to go. I met you again in a sentence I wasn't trying to finish, and that's the strange part. You don't arrive as a thought anymore. You arrive as an eruption inside thoughts that were never about you. I tried to continue normally afterward, but normally felt adjusted, like the grammar of my mind had been quietly edited without showing the revision history. So I let it stay imperfect. I met you again, not as memory but as deviation inside ordinary thinking, and I didn't correct it. Maybe we don't remember people, maybe we encountered them again and again inside structures that were never meant to hold their return. So I stopped trying to finish the sentence properly, because every ending I choose seems to carry you forward anyway.